to make compensation and also present a guilt offering. The 6. 1-7. Evidence. If a person was a witness to apostate acts, sedition, murder, which defiled the land, or certain other serious crimes, he was under obligation to report it and to testify to what he knew, or he would be subject to divine curse, publicly proclaimed. The 5. 1-13. 8. Compare PR 29. 24. As 6. 2. One witness was not enough to establish a matter, however. 2 or more were required. New 35. 30. To 17. 6. 19. 15. Compare Jo 8. 17, 18. 1-5. 19. Heb 10. 28. Witnesses were commanded by the law to speak the truth. X 20. 16. 23. 7, and were, in some cases, put under oath. Mount 26. 63. This would especially be so when the one on whom suspicion fell was the only witness to the matter. X 22. 10, 11. Since those in a legal case before the judges or at the sanctuary for judgment of a matter were regarded as standing before Jehovah, witnesses were to recognize that they were accountable to God. X 22. 8. 1. 17. 19. 17. A witness was not to accept a bribe, allow anyone wicked to persuade him to speak untruthfully, or scheme violence. X 23. 1. 8. He was not to let his testimony be swayed by pressure of a crowd or by the wealth or poverty of those involved in the case. X 23. 2. 3. Even the closest family relationship was not to hold one back from testifying against a wicked violator of the law, such as an apostate or rebellious one. 13. 6-11. 21. 18-21. Zek 13. 3. One who proved to be a false witness received the punishment that the person accused would have received if found guilty. 19. 17-21. Witnesses in all capital convictions were required to throw the first stone in the execution of the convicted one. Thus witnesses were enjoined by law to demonstrate their zeal for true, clean worship and for clearing out what was bad in Israel. This would also act as a deterrent to false testimony. It would take a very callous person to make a false accusation, knowing that he had to be the first to act in putting the accused to death. 17. 7. Material and circumstantial evidence. In case livestock had been entrusted to the care of another, the responsible one could bring in the torn body of an animal that had been killed by a wild beast as evidence, and that would owe text to a acute miritra longo. Legion 235. The matter would not have been taken to Jehovah in this manner, but she would have been adjudged guilty by the judges and stoned to death. New 5. 11-31. Documents. Records, or documents, of various kinds were used. A husband was required to give his wife a certificate of divorce when putting her away. 24. 1. J 3. 8. Compare ISA 50. 1. Genealogical records were available, as we see particularly in 1 Chronicles. Mention is made of deeds registering the sale of real estate. J 32. 9-11. Many letters were written, some of which may have been retained and may have figured in legal cases. 2 Sir 11. 14. 1 Chi 21. 8-14. 2 Chi 10. 1. NE 2. 7. Jesus' trial. The greatest travesty of justice ever committed was the trial and sentencing of Jesus Christ. Prior to his trial, the chief priests and elder men of the people took counsel together with a view to putting Jesus to death. So the judges were prejudiced and had their minds made up on the verdict before ever the trial took place. Mount 26. 3. For they bribed Judas to betray Jesus to them. Lu 22. 2-6. Because of the wrongness of their actions, they did not arrest him in the temple in the daytime, but they waited until they could act under cover of darkness and then sent a crowd armed with clubs and swords to arrest him in an isolated place outside the city. Luke 22. 52, 53. Jesus was then taken first to the house of Annas, the ex-high priest, who still wielded great authority, his son-in-law Caiaphas being the high priest at the time. Joe 18. 13. There Jesus was questioned and was slapped in the face. Joe 18. 22. Next he was led bound to Caiaphas the high priest. False witnesses were sought by the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin. Many such witnesses came forward but could not agree on their testimony, except two who twisted Jesus' words recorded at John 2. 19. Mount 26. 59-61. Mr. 14. 56-59. Finally Jesus was put under oath by the high priest and questioned as to whether he was the Christ, the Son of God. When Jesus answered in the affirmative and alluded to the prophecy at Daniel 7. 13, the high priest stripped his garments and called upon the court to find Jesus guilty of blasphemy. This verdict was rendered, and he was sentenced to death. After this they spit in his face and hit him with their fists, taunting him, contrary to the law. Mount 26. 57-68. Luke 22. 66-71. Compared to 25. 1, 2 with Joe 7. 51 and Act 23. 3. After this illegal night trial the Sanhedrin met early in the morning to confirm their judgment and for a consultation. Mr. 15. 1. Jesus was now led, again bound, to the governor's palace, to Pilate, since they said, "It is not lawful for us to kill anyone." Joe 18. 31. Here Jesus was charged with forbidding the paying of taxes to Caesar and with saying that he himself was Christ the King. Blasphemy against the God of the Jews would not have been so serious a charge in the eyes of the Romans, but sedition would. Pilate, after making futile attempts to get Jesus to testify against himself, told the Jews that he found no crime in him. Discovering, however, that Jesus was a Galilean, Pilate was happy to send him to Herod, who had jurisdiction over Galilee. Herod questioned Jesus, hoping to see a sign performed by him, but Jesus refused. Herod then discredited Jesus, making fun of him, and sent him back to Pilate. Luke 23. 1-11. Pilate now tried to release Jesus in harmony with a custom of that time, but the Jews refused, calling for the release of a seditionist and murderer instead. Joe 18. 38-40. Pilate therefore had Jesus scourged, and the soldiers again mistreated him. After this, Pilate brought Jesus outside and tried to get his release, but the Jews insisted. Impale him. Impale him. Finally he issued the order to have Jesus impaled. Mount 27. 15-26. Luke 23. 13-25. Joe 19. 1-16. What laws of God did the Jewish Otextoi acute Miritra Longo have him 236 possessed by many demons? Possibly the chief one of these demons caused this man to say that his name was Legion. The fact that in the 1st century CE Roman legions usually consisted of 6,000 men may give some indication of the large number of demons involved. So fierce were the demon-possessed man and his companion that no one dared to pass the area where they had their dwelling among the tombs. Under demon influence the man who said his name was Legion walked about naked, and day and night he cried aloud and slashed himself with stones. All efforts to bind him, even with fetters and chains, were unsuccessful. Christ Jesus, however, freed this man and his companion from the power of the demons. Thereafter the expelled demons took possession of a herd of swine and caused these to rush over a precipice to their death in the Sea of Galilee. Mount 8. 28-34. Mr. 5. 1-20. Luke 8. 26-39. Seeger Darrens. Swine. For details about the Roman legions, see Army Roman. Habim the middle dot Habim. A name appearing at Genesis 10. 13 and 1 Chronicles 1. 11 among the descendants of Ham through Mizraim. Since the Hebrew name is a plural form, many scholars hold that a tribe taking its name from one of Mizraim's sons is meant. See, however, Mizraim. The Habim are generally identified with the Libyans and at least seem to have constituted one of the tribes inhabiting Libya in ancient times. While identification is difficult, they were probably the same as the Lumidal.vim mentioned elsewhere in the Hebrew text, as at 2 Chronicles 12:3, where the American Standard Version reads Lubim and other translations read Libyans. Mo. N.W. R.S. Lehi high jawbone. The scene of one or, possibly, 2 Israelite victories over the Philistines. Its exact location is unknown today. Some identify it with Kbad Suyag, which perhaps derives its name from the Greek word see gon jawbone, less than 3 kilometers to Me'i of Beth Shemesh. At Lehi, Samson struck down 1,000 Philistines with the moist jawbone of an ass. Subsequently he called the site Ramath Lehi, meaning lofty place of the jawbone, probably to memorialize the victory Jehovah had given him there. JG 15. 9-19 Originally, though, Lehi may have got its name from the shape of its crags. Later, according to the rendering of numerous translators, Shema struck down many Philistines assembled at Lehi. 2 Sa 23. 11, 12. At JB, NW, RS however, the Hebrew term la-middle.chi-middle.ya literally means into the 10th village, and, by a slight change in vowel pointing, is rendered to Lehi. Lamu middle.l belonging to God. An unidentified king of ancient times whose words are recorded in Proverbs chapter 31. His identity has been the subject of considerable discussion, some commentators suggesting that Lemuel was another name for Solomon. Others identify Lemuel with Hezekiah. The words of King Lemuel constitute the weighty message that his mother gave to him in correction. PR 31. 1. However, the time and circumstances of the king's reception of such information from his mother are unknown. This weighty message advises against involvement with a bad woman, warns of how intoxicating liquor can pervert judgment, highlights the need to judge righteously, and then describes a good wife,